Hey everybody, this is William Cunningham, aka Reggie, of My Hope in Marriage. Wishing you a good day or a good evening, depending on you watching this. Now, My Hope in Marriage is designed to help you build a happy and fulfilling marriage. That's the underlying goal, and it's from a man's perspective because I'm a guy and I can speak more from a man's perspective. But a lot of the principles and the things that I talk about goes both ways. So even though I'm going to be speaking from a man's perspective in a lot of situations, realize that it goes both ways. It may be different. It's not a mirror image or image of each other because men and women think different. So just keep that in mind. Because, for example, the examples that I give may be from a man's experience. Okay, you can find My Hope in Marriage on the web at www.myhopeinmarriage.com. All right. Well, with that said, let's get into this video, and it's going to be. I'm going to talk to you about something that probably happens frequently in a marriage, in a husband and wife relationship within the household, or perhaps some situations or some circumstances outside the household, and that is romantic gestures. And by romantic gestures, I mean, a caress here, a touch there, a fondling here or there, or a kiss here, what have you. Just romantic gestures. I remember when I first got married, a minister talked to my wife and I, and he talked about this type of things. He said that sex, having sex, intercourse, let's say later in the day, even though you may have it in the morning, but let's say later in the day, he said it's built up to that. And that begins in the morning, with simple gestures here, simple fondling, teasing, or what have you. And then at night or later in the day, when the husband and wife get together and they do make love, have sex, what have you, it is the culmination of what's been happening all day. All right. So with that said, let's talk about those things that happen up to that point. And even if it doesn't necessarily lead to sex, it's not like every time you have romantic gesture, that means, okay, we're going to have sex later. Not necessarily. But it's something that it promotes affection. It's a way of showing affection in the marriage. So what I want to talk about is handling those gestures. Because if you don't handle them, then your spouse may feel you're rejecting them. They're being rejected by you. Your romantic gestures are being pushed aside. You see what I'm saying? So it's important that you don't take those gestures for granted. If your husbands start touching you, feeling you, fondling you, man, that's communication. It also could be a desire. He also could want you, and that's a good thing that he wants you. Because if he wants somebody else, then that's a problem. If I'm sure you can agree with that. So he wants you. All right. And likewise with the wife, she wants him. So she may have sexual or romantic gestures to him. She might want to hug him, kiss him, fondle him, or whatever. And you guys shouldn't reject that. You should not take that for granted. You shouldn't push it off to the side. It's serious. It's always serious. Now, once in a while, maybe you're really, really busy, but you still want to acknowledge it at least. Don't just ignore it. Your husband comes to you and he starts fondling you or he starts touching you, rubbing your back or whatever. You don't want wives just continue on the phone or continue talking about something else, continue talking about the job. Acknowledge him. I think that's the key. Acknowledge your spouse's romantic gestures. Realize it means something to them. You're in a marriage, for goodness sake. When they are doing that, whatever it may be, realize that they are communicating, they are expressing, they are just living in that marriage and closeness and trying to get close or what have you to you. All right? So, a guy emotionally connects with his wife through what? You all should know this by now. Say it together. A guy communicates or he connects emotionally with his wife through sex. And that sex may begin with fondling in the morning, smacking her, behind or whatever the case may be. So that is important. That is important to the guy, ladies. Now, I can't speak from the woman's perspective, but for the woman, she does these gestures as well, a hug, or she may slap him or whatever, The important thing is that the reason that you do it is because there is something behind it. It's a purpose. Even if it's just to enjoy your wife or enjoy your spouse, there's still a purpose. It's not like there's some stranger or someone you hired to rub up. All right? It's you. And when you take that desire for you and push it aside, then you're creating another issue where that desire may get displaced to someone or something else. Maybe he'll bury himself in his work, ladies. Maybe he'll get that from another woman. So we got to be really careful that we handle that. We don't take those gestures for granted because they are important. They have a purpose. They mean something to us. To both men and women, they actually mean something to us. Now, romantic gestures may lead to sex, but it definitely is a form of connecting with each other. And that leads to what? The connection. Now, just because a guy rubs his wife's back or something like that doesn't mean that he's saying, okay, we're going to have sex. In 90% of the cases, maybe, he would love it. We would love it if that were the case. But, your life can't be just about sex. You have other responsibilities. You want to talk about things seriously, intimate conversations, and so forth and so on. But it's important that you realize that that is a connection. And in a marriage, one thing you want to really nurture is that connection. Because far too often, from my observations, and definitely from the resources that you see online, like forums and whatnot, and comments to even my videos and articles, is that men and women, husband and wife, tend to live a business life, household incorporated. He does his job and she does hers. And together the household is run. The kids are get to school and get their clothes. The bills get paid. The house is taken care of, so forth and so on. But there's no connection. There's no real intimate emotional connection between the two. Why? Because you don't nurture it. You don't nurture that. You don't pursue that. You get married and after the ceremony it becomes business. All right. But you want to nurture that. You want to nurture a connection. And for a guy, that means, sensuality, sex, and just being intimate with his wife. And to the woman, is still a connection sensually and so forth and so on. You want that because you definitely don't want it for somebody else. You don't want him to go to someone else for that. You don't want her to go to someone else for that. Okay? Okay, so don't take those gestures for granted. Engage. Have a paradigm of engagement where the husband doesn't feel rejected. He doesn't get to the point where he knows that his romantic gestures will lead to nothing. You don't want that. You don't want him to think that. You don't want your wife to think that her romantic gestures leads to emptiness, leads to nothing. You don't want her to be that because, she can start, getting eyes for someone else to get that from. Or she may bury herself in her work or career. Maybe she starts whatever. You want to have a connection with each other. Don't take that for granted. Engage. If he begins to rub you, acknowledge it, engage it. Maybe stick it out there or whatever. I don't know. Just do something so that you know, or so that he knows that you receive his gesture, his connection, his desire for you. Otherwise, if it's routine that you reject him or that he feels rejected, you're going to create another problem. And one of the things that's going to come up, and that is rejection. Not rejection, resentment. You don't want that to be a thing in your marriage. Okay, so learn to want them. Even if you're not in the mood, do it anyway. I remember Miles Monroe in a seminar that he gave years ago. He said sometimes in a marriage, you have to do things out of knowledge. In other words, you may not feel like doing it. You may not be in the mood to do it, but you do it anyway because you know it's the best thing for the relationship. It's the right thing to do. Not that you have to be a robot and do it all the time. There are going to be some times when you really, really have a headache. There's going to be a time when something is really, really, really troubling you, and that's when you shift gears and perhaps talk about that or deal with that. But I thought that was an important thing, and I remember it was a video I watched about. It was a woman psychologist or marriage counselor. I forget who she was, but she said, or it might have been an article I read, where she said, the woman, you might not be in the mood because men don't need to be in the mood. We can just click a switch. But anyway, you may not be in the mood, but do it anyway because you'll find that you'll like it. You find that you may like it, even though you're not in the mood. You can switch the gear. See, guys know how to do that. We can just switch the gear because I already know in my head that I'm going to enjoy it. If she doesn't reject me, because if my gestures are rejected mostly, then I'm going to associate my gesture with pain to her. And that's not good. All right. That's not good at all. So acknowledge his gestures, acknowledge her gestures, and do something. Engage in it. Engage him. Engage her. You see, that's very, very important in your relationship. You do it every other place. You do things out of knowledge all over the place. But when it comes to a marriage, for some reason, we think we can just neglect that. And you shouldn't. You shouldn't neglect romantic gestures from your spouse. Wives, you should not reject your husband's petting or what have you. And husbands, you should not reject your wives' petting or hugging or whatever. You need to engage. You need to acknowledge and engage those romantic gestures. And of course, don't neglect sex in a relationship because that's a deadly force when you do that, because that will destroy your relationship. Because remember, guys connect with their wives emotionally through sex. And if he doesn't have it, then guess what? He's not connecting emotionally to you. So he doesn't have a connection to you, except a business connection that I talked about a little earlier. All right? And realize that those gestures, like I said, are a form of communicating. He's communicating his love for you. He's communicating his desire for you. All right? And likewise, the woman is communicating to his husband when she does those gestures as well. Okay? And if you don't acknowledge, you consistently do not acknowledge, you consistently do not engage, your spouse will count that as rejection. You're rejecting him. If wives, if you just ignore him when he does that, when you don't engage, when he's just like, it's just on one side of the equation and nothing happens on the other, then he's going to start feeling rejected. And when that happens, bad things start to happen for the relationship. You don't want that to happen. And again, I don't want you to think that I'm saying that you must, in every situation, every time your husband touches you, okay, let's have sex. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in a normal, consistent manner, his gestures should be communicated, or he should feel from you that you accept him, that you want him too, because he's already demonstrating that he wants you, so that you want him too. And likewise, when your wife have these gestures to you, when she does these gestures, she's communicating something to you. Ladies, I would love your comment. What are you communicating? What might those gestures be? I can tell you from research and so forth, but your husbands, your wives are communicating something. So you want to accept that. You want to acknowledge that. You want to engage in that. And communicate that love that you have for each other romantically as well. Not just business, not just household incorporated. You want to have that connection. And sometimes, like I learned from Miles Monroe years ago, I'm talking about back in the 90s, you have to do things out of knowledge. It's not that you always got to wait until you're in the mood. Just do it because you know it's the right thing to do. Just do it because you know it might be important to your spouse, especially if you come home from a hard day's work and your husband starts, he's looking for comfort. He's looking, so acknowledge that and engage in that. Help him out. All right? Be sensual back. Maybe I'll have another video on the importance of sensuality in the marriage, because when you think about it, sex is all over the media, it's all over TV. Why can't a husband and wife really nurture that in their own relationship? All right? Okay. Well, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Simply acknowledge and engage in the romantic gestures that your spouse does. Don't ignore them. They're important. If your husband is rubbing you or something, he may be just trying to comfort you. Maybe he sees or thinks that you're having a bad day and he feels as though, rubbing your back might just help in some way. But in some instances, he's just expressing romance. He's just trying to be romantic. And likewise for the females, for the wives. She's just trying to be romantic. Acknowledge that. Engage in it. Nurture your romance. Nurture romance between the two of you. Goodness gracious. You get the bills paid, the kids clothed and all that stuff, food on the table. Nurture your romance between each other. All right? All right. Don't neglect that in your marriage, because from what I see, it is neglected a lot. All right? And especially from a man's perspective, it's a big problem for guys. Not that it's not a problem for women, but from the amount of comments and the amount of data that I've seen, it's a big problem for guys when their romantic gestures go unanswered. It's a big complaint and it's a big problem. All right? And so we need to nurture that in our marriage. All right? All right. Well, I'm William Cunningham, or you can call me Reggie, of My Hope in Marriage. You can visit us online at www.myhopeinmarriage.com. Well, I hope this video has blessed you. I hope it has helped you. I hope it has given you something to think about, or even look into, research, and try or implement in your own marriage, because that's ultimately what I would like to do, is to give you resources to help you to construct your own intimate, fulfilling, happy marriage. All right? All right, well, until the next time, be blessed.